Stop. Look around you. Everything that you see is most likely designed by someone. The device that's in your hands or in your pocket, the chair that you sit on, or the table that's in front of you, somebody or somebodies spent hours and hours making that thing that you hold, sit on, or put stuff on exactly as it is. Not 1 inch taller and not 1 inch wider. Whether it's the programming that makes your phone do exactly what you want it to do when you're holding it, or the size, the comfortability, the flexibility of the object that you can see or feel. It's all designed. So how do these geniuses do this? Many of them use some sort of version of design thinking. Design thinking is a specific process of thinking and planning that leads to great design, engineering, and in the end ends up in your pocket or on your desk. Design thinking dates back to 1935, but was only adopted widely just in the last couple of decades. Design thinking is all about solving complex problems marked by ambiguity and leads to answers that are broad with no clear right or wrong solution. In this unit, you will learn about design thinking, one version of design flow, how might we statements, and solve a complex but fun problem that we can all relate to. I hope you're ready. Let's get started. Design thinking, or sometimes I like to call it design flow, is the process of designing from start to finish. And that process is a messy process. I'm going to tell it to you in a really clean way, but it's not really that clean. It's pretty messy, which is why my last video for you was actually kind of a trick question, asking you what the order of the design thinking process is, because really the order changes based on what's happening in the design cycle or the design process. So let's just look at those 5 elements really quick. Let me just point them out to you. The first one is empathy. I typically say this one comes first because before you start to design something, you should be talking to the people that the design is for. For example, if I'm trying to solve a problem for a certain group of people, I should sit down with them and find out about the problem. I should ask them questions about the problems. I should develop needs and wants. Sometimes we call these design requirements. But as I'm sitting down with the client, I can really get an idea for what they need, okay? So let's say I want to design a brand new iPhone. I'm going to sit down with the current iPhone 12 users. As I'm recording this video, there will probably be a 13 by the time the video gets posted. But I'm going to sit down with the iPhone 12 users. I'm going to ask them some questions about the iPhone 12. What are the things you like? What are the things you dislike? I'm going to get really specific about the things they like, get really specific about the things they dislike, and that's going to help me develop my design requirements and figure out what are the needs and wants of the iPhone 12 users so that I can get prepared to create the new iPhone 13. So that's empathy. That's me sitting down, empathizing, and learning from people who use the iPhone 12. Define is the next phase. And the reason this one always comes after empathy is because define is where you actually clarify and write down those design requirements. You sit down, you meet, you write down, you take notes, but then you stop, you pause. It's kind of like preparing to write an essay. You stop and you think, okay, I've got all this information from the clients. Now I'm going to write it down in one succinct, nice, well-packaged paragraph, or sometimes just a couple sentences even, to write down exactly what the person wants, what they need. Get that all down so that you have one encompassing view that you're aiming for. It's kind of like if you're shooting arrows in the forest hoping to hit an apple. You're probably not going to hit one, but if you go grab all the apples and you put them together, it makes it a lot easier for you to hit what you're aiming at. All right, that's the second one. The third thing I like to do is ideate. The reason I do ideate third is because now that I have those design needs and wants for the client, now I can come up with all sorts of ideas to try and solve this problem. And I'm going to really think outside the box and come up with all sorts of ideas. And I try to force myself, as I said in the last video, I try to force myself to come up with 3 different ideas that don't incorporate the same design as the other one. And so I'm really trying to think outside the box and force myself to think about what might not even be possible yet, okay? And I do that before prototyping because I need to allow myself to come up with lots of ideas first. Which brings me to prototyping. With prototyping, now I'm starting to actually build out one or more of those ideas. Depending on how much time you have, you really should build out more than one of the ideas. When you start prototyping 3, 4, 5 ideas, you get a lot of really good feedback about what will solve the problem best. Unfortunately, sometimes we're limited by time or resources, and we don't get to build out all of them. So my encouragement to my students when that is the case is to take all the ideas they have, figure out one, is there a way to bring many of these ideas together and package them in one thing? For example, if you want a bigger iPhone battery in the iPhone 13, but you also want a smaller phone, that's probably not going to be possible. Those 2 ideas aren't going to work together. So you're going to have to decide which one you want to focus on. However, let's say you say, I want my iPhone to be faster and smaller. That is possible. It is possible to change the way that the interior of the iPhone 13 would be laid out to make sure that you have space for that bigger chip, for example, right? So that's the prototyping phase. Sometimes it's digital, sometimes it's physical. A lot of times I start with digital. I start designing in Tinkercad in a 3-dimensional space, or I'm designing on paper and pencil in a 2-dimensional space. And then from there, I can start actually building out my design, whatever it might be. Finally, is the test, okay? When you start testing your ideas, this is about taking that prototype, even if it's really raw, to the client, the person that needs that iPhone 13. You say, hey, look, I know it doesn't look quite right yet. I know it's not done, but does this meet what you need? The reason you stop to test, even though the design process isn't over, this might be in the middle, right? You stop to test because sometimes the client doesn't actually know exactly what they want until you start to show them stuff and they start to realize, well, I don't want the phone that small, and you've gone through all this work to make the phone smaller, and they don't even want it that small. So it's helpful to test along the way, bring in focus groups, sit down with those people, show them your process before it's all done, because that feedback, if that's the person you're designing for, they're the one that you want to love that design, right? Now, the one thing I want to add before I end this video about the design thinking process, okay, is the ideate, prototype, and test phases. They don't just go in, they go in a cycle. They go back and forth, and sometimes you go from ideate to prototype, and as you're prototyping, you're like, oh, back to the drawing board. This isn't going to work. I got to go back to ideating. And you might bounce around those 3 specifically quite a bit. It's also possible you might find yourself back to the empathy define phase, because as you're testing your idea, then you might find that that person you're testing it with gives you more feedback, which changes your design requirements, your needs and wants, okay? I know that was a lot of information, so I'm going to move you on from this video. We'll watch the next video at a later date.